Hello, horror stories. I want to share an experience I had while working as a truck driver. My name is Jason. This happened in 2016, after becoming obsessed with documentaries and paranormal experiments. It was when one night turned into a nightmare, where I lost my best friend in a sinister night, searching for answers that I still can't seem to find. I woke up at noon, after arriving home from a long night of work, around 4 a.m. My wife had prepared lunch for me, and we took the opportunity to eat together. Our son was in school, so we decided that time to talk about the mortgage and unpaid credit card debts we were carrying. Also, our son had been getting sick frequently lately. The medicines were very expensive, and he had to stay for observation for a few days. With all those expenses, our account was in the negative. In those weeks, I felt like I had a noose around my neck. We were under a lot of stress, and my salary was barely enough to cover the basics, but for the third time, we sat down and crunched the numbers to further reduce unnecessary expenses and try to alleviate the situation a bit. I remember that on that occasion, my best friend Steven offered to lend me money, telling me that I could pay him back whenever I wanted, no rush. Steven was also my work colleague. We were both long-haul truck drivers across the country. We worked nights that day, and he came to my house to bring me the money. He had been my salvation. Steven was part of the family. We had known each other since childhood and had never been apart since. Evening began to fall, and with dusk I dismissed my wife. It was time to start my shift. She looked more relieved with the money Steven had lent us, and that also comforted me. Steven had left a few minutes earlier to start his route, almost half an hour before me. By the time I got on the road, we were heading down the same route, but we were a few miles apart. It was past midnight. The road was quiet but very dark. Everything seemed normal until my cell phone rang. It was Steven. I was surprised because we always communicated by radio and we didn't usually talk on the phone while we were on the road driving. When I picked up, I heard his breathing hitching and his voice cracking, as if he was running and running away from something. I asked him what was wrong, and as best he could, he replied that something was chasing him. He asked me to get help or hurry to get there, as his truck had gone off the road and into the bush, making it impossible to continue. The rear wheels were in the air. I accelerated as fast as I could while asking Steven not to hang up the call and tell me exactly who was following him. With terror in his voice, he told me it was not a person, but a silhouette that crossed the road. It didn't look like anything familiar, and that's what made him turn the wheel, heading deeper into the bush. I was trying to imagine what he was describing, but I found it impossible to understand what was happening. I accelerated to the maximum, aware that I still had several kilometers to go, and my hopes of helping him were minimal. I asked him to stay on the road, to hide or try to seek help from a passing vehicle. However, with the road so desolate and at that hour, I knew it would be a stroke of luck to find someone to help him. On the other end of the line, I could hear his breathing getting more and more agitated, probably due to his running through the bush. Suddenly, his breathing stopped abruptly, and then he asked me to take care of his son in his absence, to tell his family how much he loved them and how sorry he was. Before I could answer her, a piercing scream rang out and the call was cut off. My mind began to imagine the worst, and I felt an uncontrollable shudder as my heart pounded and my foot hit the gas pedal to the metal. I didn't want to face Steven's body. I couldn't take it. I had to get there to help him. I still had hope that he was badly injured but alive. That was all that mattered to me. I was in shock, unable to accept that he could be lifeless. All I could think about was finding him and getting him to a hospital. However, I knew Steven had run too far and couldn't be on the road. He had to be somewhere deep in the bush. Orienting myself in the dark and knowing which direction he had gone would be extremely difficult in order to find him. I tried calling 911, but the signal was low. I knew Steven was only depending on me at that point. Finally, a few miles ahead, I spotted the red lights on the back of Steven's truck. I pulled up beside him, but stayed in my truck, not daring to get out until I understood what was happening. I began to accelerate slowly, and, at that moment, the truck began to lurch as if a supernatural force was holding it down. Although I couldn't see anything, a shiver ran through my body as I gripped the steering wheel. Ready to accelerate and get out of there as fast as possible, terror invaded me. The seconds became eternal. As the truck continued to shake, fear and adrenaline mixed together, and my mind raced trying to understand what was happening. Just as I decided to accelerate to the maximum, a blurry figure appeared in the side mirrors. It was hard to make out, but it didn't look human. However, its form was not completely solid, as if it was made of fog or shadow. In a brief moment of clarity, I tried again to call 911. Although the signal was weak, I managed to provide the operator with the exact kilometer and my full name so they could send help and locate Stephen. I was a little relieved for a moment, but I was aware that it wasn't over yet. I pressed the gas pedal, and the engine roared as the truck tried to move forward. It seemed as if something or someone was grabbing it from behind, preventing me from continuing. The resistance was intense, as if an invisible force was determined to keep me there. Panic gripped me and the truck vibrated under the pressure. It was all bloody chaos. Finally, after what seemed like eternal minutes, I saw the lights of a patrol car in the distance. The sight of the flashing lights filled me with renewed hope. I accelerated harder, and suddenly the resistance gave way. The truck sped toward the patrol car lights, and I approached the patrol car, and, upon seeing me, the officers jumped out of the vehicle in surprise with flashlights in hand. I stopped the truck next to them and got out, still shaking, to explain the situation and the urgency of finding Stephen, who was still missing in grave danger. The officers radioed for backup and an ambulance, aware that something was not right. Stephen's truck was deep in the bush and there was no sign of him. They cordoned off the area and closed the road, beginning an exhaustive search to find Stephen. The rescue team, made up of police and firefighters, scoured the area for hours, inspecting every nook and cranny of the forest. However, there was no sign of Stephen. Hay decided to return at dawn, since the hopes of finding him in the darkness of the night were minimal. They had even brought search dogs to speed up the task, but were unable to find any clues. After several weeks of intense searching, Stephen's case was officially closed without him being declared dead, as his body was never found. For the authorities, it remains an unsolved missing persons case. However, I know that a supernatural force took his life and that he will never return. The days following Stephen's disappearance were a whirlwind of anguish for me. The feeling of having failed as a colleague haunted me constantly. I sank into a deep depression, unable to shake off the guilt and fear that had gripped me. People in the town spoke in whispers about what had happened, and some even suggested that something in the woods had claimed Stephen. In time, my life went on, but the memory of that night never left me. I started working on the truck again, trying to erase the memories and move on. However, every time I drove into a forest or onto a lonely stretch of road, I felt something dark and unknown watching me, and though I tried to convince myself that it was just my mind playing tricks, I couldn't shake the feeling that something more sinister was lurking in the darkness. One day, while going through old photos and documents, I found a letter from Stephen that had never been delivered. The letter contained a message to his family and friends, but there was also a note at the bottom that chilled my blood. If you are reading this, it is because I have not been able to return. There is something in the forest, something I can't explain, that has trapped me. Don't let what has taken me also take you. Heed my warning and stay away from the forest. I am not alone there. At that moment, my blood ran cold. The lingering terror of what really happened in the forest drove me to search for answers. Since then, I have dedicated my life to investigating the unexplained, hoping to one day understand what happened to Stephen. If you have enjoyed this story, we invite you to subscribe and activate the bell so you don't miss any others. Until next time.